rewrite their relationship map, understand their relational patterns so they can show up authentically and have a relationship and love and connection that feels good and is satisfying and long lasting. And yeah, so I am the creator of killingcupid.com, and I created Killing Cupid because, and sometimes people ask me why Killing Cupid? I call it Killing Cupid because my goal in the work that I do is I think a lot of times we grow up with ideas about what love is supposed to be and how things are supposed to happen. And when it doesn't happen that way, or when we try to make things work the way that we want it to, it doesn't it doesn't work out that way. And so my goal is to kind of break that mold and to kind of break down those old barriers and really remember that, what love is. It's not something that was kind of given to us or something that was just, our ideas about love are sometimes things that were given to us, rather than things that are actually necessarily coming from us authentically. And so my goal is to help you connect to that. So, yeah, so you can live the life you love and have connections that really feel good and make you come to life.
One question I get, Nadia, is from those who I come in contact with, and these are usually women who are older, let's say they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I preface that saying that 40 is no longer old because I'm at the door of 40 now. So
Same here.
one thing that I like to ask people because it gets asked of me is that terrain. I'm 40, 50, 60s year old. I am too old for love because that's something that people in their 20s experience. What do you like to tell those people?
Well, first of all, that is completely not true because if more than two people are asking this, then that just logically can't be true, right? Because if everybody is looking for love and they're over 50, then obviously there's a big pool of people, right? So we can just take that off the table from the very beginning, right? But, there's no, yeah, I mean, I think that when you're in your 20s, love can be easier because you maybe don't know yourself as well. Like you don't have the same things that you need to keep in mind to be compatible. I don't think that so I think that sometimes we look back and we think, oh, this is maybe easier for them, or maybe this is something that people in their 20s do, but nothing could be further from the truth. Everybody needs companionship, everybody is looking for that. And I think that sorry, I totally just got tripped on my words here. But no, but nothing could, no, nothing, absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. I think that when you get older, actually, it can be a really different experience because you know yourself better. There's actually a lot of people who are choosing to be single when they're older because they look back and like I can certainly relate to this. When I was 25, like I didn't know who I was. I was going through a lot of changes. My life was totally, I didn't know where my life was going to take me. And I also knew that like I wasn't steady enough in myself to have a relationship. I didn't know I was going to be able to show up for a relationship in the way that I wanted to. And a lot of people who are in their 40s or 50s, the way that they're approaching relationships now is coming from that place of, hey, I'm stronger in myself. I know what I want now, and I want a relationship to reflect that. But that's also really can be really difficult because you're also in different territory. When you're in your 20s, it's easier. It doesn't matter if you're still learning things together, and so you may have a bigger pool, but sometimes, but I think also when you get older, we're looking for quality over quantity, right? And I think that's a really big difference. I think that's a really big difference. And so, yeah, no, nothing could be further from the truth.
I will agree. In my 20s, the people I dated, and please don't come for me, even though none of you know where I live now. It definitely wasn't love in my 20s. It may have been something else. Maybe I thought it was love at that time, but did I love the people that I was with? I believe I did, and I behaved as such. But as I got older, I began to change my definition of what love is, and I began to change my lens into what love looks like. Do you believe that some people struggle with finding love, especially let's say after a breakup, because maybe their perspective on what love is, or maybe what it can be, is still something that is unhealthy to their life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's breakups are really difficult is because for one, we're dealing with a loss and we feel that loss deeply because we were close to somebody, because it was something that was special to us. And we because it's something that was really special to, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't know, I'm just keep tripping over my words today.
Yeah, no, it's just one of those days that a girl goes through, right? So,
Yeah.
one thing is was asking is that after a breakup, right? Let's say I came out of a long-term relationship, I poured my all into that relationship, and then it ends for a reason that maybe I felt was there, but I didn't truly embrace it. So now, post relationship, post breakup, I'm trying to search for love, but unfortunately, I haven't grown as a person, and my perspective of what love is still something that is unhealthy to the person I want to be. So, I guess my question then is, how can we change our view of what love should be when it comes to love being in a healthy way and not an unhealthy one?
Okay, thank you. Um, this is really, yeah, so this is a lot of the work, this is a lot of work that I do, and it's really hard because you're trying to heal yourself and you're trying to protect yourself while you're trying to deal with all of these, you're trying to move forward, but then you're also looking back at the past in a place that can be really painful. And it's a difficult place to be, but I think it can be actually one of the places for the most growth, the most enlightenment, and the most empowerment. Because what I kind of see it is when you've gone through a breakup, I kind of consider it like surgery, right? Like when you need to go through surgery, you need to go under anesthesia, they cut you open, it's very painful, and you need to rest, and you're going to be out of the ring for a little bit, and you really need to take that time to focus on yourself. And if you don't, then you can really do a lot of damage, right? And the same thing kind of goes for a breakup. When you've gone through a breakup, especially when it was really painful, that can really rock your view of relationships, of yourself, of other people, how you connect to other people. But that time after a breakup, that's when that wound is open, right? That's when your heart is open. That's when all of those things that you're feeling, all of your beliefs about relationships, all of those things are kind of on the table for better or for worse. And I think the most important thing that you can do in that is to look back at the relationship and really, I always encourage people to take a relationship history. What were some things that worked really well in that relationship? What were some of the things that didn't really work very well? What were the things that you thought, what are the things that have changed over the course of the relationship? Who were you before and then who were you after? What were some of your, and then kind of taking, I always encourage people to take a look at it like that because when you go through a breakup, sometimes, a lot of times we get together with somebody and we think that it's going to be great and it's going to be forever and it's going to be, it feels like it's the one and everything makes sense. And then when it doesn't work out, even though you've done your best and you think that you've done everything right, then we're kind of left with the question of, well, what now? Like I did everything right and that wasn't the answer. And that can be really jarring. And so I think that a lot of times what we're actually confronted with when this relationship ends is yes, it's the loss, but it's also we have to change, we're kind of being forced to change our perspective on these things, whether we realize that is what's going on, right? So one of the things that I've heard a lot with the people that I've worked with is they'll say like, I always tried to be the best person that I could for my partner. I tried to always show up for them and I was always trying to, I never let anybody down, but I still wasn't good enough for them. And I don't really understand what to do now. Like if even me trying to give everything to them wasn't good enough, how can I be in love again? And that might sound like something really good, and that might not, that's not the, we can all agree that like wanting to show up and wanting to be there for each other is an absolute prerequisite for being in a relationship. But we also need to examine what did that actually practically look like? You know, were you always showing up even when you should have had a boundary or you should have said, like, no, like, let's negotiate, or I need you to help me with this, or were you, how did this actually practically show up? Or you might believe, this may be that, if I really care about somebody, I'm always going to try to help them. Well, were you with somebody who you always had to help, but they weren't able to give anything back to you? And these are just a couple of different examples. And so when we So sometimes I think that one of the reasons why it's so difficult in a breakup is we can look at these things and say, well, these were really good and I was doing my best. I believe that most people are doing their best in a relationship. Obviously, that's not always the case, but sometimes, but I believe for the most part, we want to, we don't want it to end at the very least. And but sometimes we look back on the things that we were, how we were approaching it and how we were thinking about it, and it's like, wait a sec, actually, if I was believing that I was always supposed to be there for this person, I was always the one who had to show up, but then they were never doing the same thing for me. And eventually I started to feel burned out. And that was kind of, and that sort of was what precipitated our fights. Well, then maybe what I need to do is I need to learn how to communicate my needs, or maybe I need to really be real with myself about what do I need in a relationship. And I need to start choosing people who are going to choose me instead of being in a situation where, I'm pursuing somebody who's maybe not the best for me. So there's a lot I could say about that. But number one thing I would say is, go back and your original question was, how do I go back and how do I change and become the person I need to be after a breakup? It really just comes from looking back at the relationship and really getting serious with yourself about how things progressed and how you felt. And I think it's really important to work with a coach on this because it can be really, we never see things from our own, it's really difficult to observe things, especially when you're in the middle of it. But going through a breakup and looking back at those times and seeing how you felt in those moments and seeing how you connected to that person and what did that really mean for you, because a lot of times we get into relationships and I always say the bad breakups happen before the relationship does, because this is usually born out of a place of us not choosing people that are good for us, or trying to kind of put a square, what's the saying, a square peg into a round hole, and then we end up putting so much energy into make a relationship work, and then one or both partners can end up fighting, or one person doesn't feel seen or heard, and this basically for a whole slew of reasons, this can create a lot of different issues and incompatibilities that can lead to a really bad breakup. So I'm gonna stop there, but there's a whole lot I could say a lot more about this topic. I don't know if
I
I
would
answered
say
your
keep
question.
going. You did. I would say keep going. Spill all the information because it's something that we all need, something that I need, something that you share that you need. We need this information. I went through when I had a relationship that ended, romantic one, and after the breakup, I looked at my phone, Nadia, and I was like, whew, thank God. Right? It was almost instantaneously that I felt a relief. It was like something came off of my
Oh,
shoulders. The reason why I share that is two things. One, the body knows,
yeah.
right? What the mind and definitely sometimes the heart will ignore because we're still looking it through um lenses of potential. Well, if I help them through this, they could become this. Or if I just tolerate this, maybe they'll realize. What I learned during that time was I can't change other people that don't necessarily want to be changed, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's at that moment in time or down the road. And two, maybe I'm the problem. And I know some people are gonna look back and be like, oh my God, what do you mean, Taryn? Well, maybe I'm expecting from someone else something that they can't give to me, right? And that's a fair assessment. Maybe what I want, I can't find through that person. So, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this person to be something that one, maybe they're not comfortable with, or two, they just don't have it within them. But because I have strong feelings, I'm hopeful. I'm patient. I'm spending months, and then months become years, and then years become decades. And then when you're old, gray, and toothless, you're like, I hate you. Let's get a divorce. When it should have ended all those years ago. So I shared that because that's what I've learned. And I think sometimes we struggle to be honest with ourselves. Do you see your clients or people in general not being honest with themselves when it comes to the relationships that they're in?
I would say that it's not even so much about not being honest with themselves. I think it's just sometimes we really don't know. I mean, I always call it, we have a relationship map, right? That means that we have beliefs and ideas about the roles that we're supposed to assume and things that we're supposed to do in a relationship. And that can really inform the patterns that we create, the people that we feel comfortable interacting with. Because generally speaking, the people that we feel compatible with are going to some degree share the beliefs that we have. right? So there needs to be some kind of mutual understanding there. But a lot of times, what I see happen is that we get into these relationships, and as those things, we start to kind of see those play out, we'll be confronted with a situation where we're like, oh, actually, like, I'm not really, this is actually not me. And it's not from a negative place. And I think that can be a really beautiful thing. But it's really hard to break out of that in a relationship because it might feel like I'm being selfish, or, how do I tell this person, like, you you gave me this beautiful realization about all these things that I want, that, and it's not you. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, nobody would say that, but there is something really beautiful about that, and I don't even think it's coming from a place of like lying to themselves. I mean, I think that sometimes, I think especially, I was actually just starting to record a video about this the other day. I think especially for people who are high performers or people who have really big hearts and are used to, being there for other people, it feels nice to do that, right? But what can end up happening is that we'll want to, we want somebody who can really, interact with that tender side of us. But then when it comes down to it, that might be something that we like doing for other people. And we may be so used to doing that for other people. But then once that comes into a relationship, we're not really getting our needs met. And we might not even in our daily life, we might not be in a situation where we even realize like how important that is. Like if I'm at work, I'm thinking about what I need to do for my colleagues and how I need to get my job done, but I'm not necessarily thinking about how I'm being seen or if I'm being, this is being, reciprocated, right? And I think a lot of times there's this idea of, love being sacrifice or love being, love should be a certain way. And it's like, well, as long as I'm doing those things, this is supposed to work, right? Like if I keep showing up, this should work. But that's only just a small part of the story. And I think one of the things that makes breakup so difficult because it might feel like, oh, I kept showing up and I got nothing for it. Well, now, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm just, like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, I did my best and I failed. And that's totally not it at all. You just learned something else about yourself that from this relationship. And now, you realize that you need something different. And that's it. The worst thing that we can do is take this as like a value judgment about ourselves when it's really just a learning experience. I've had horrible breakups when I look back and I'm like, man, like I don't want to talk to him again, but I'm actually really, really happy I had that because it really forced me to face some things about myself. I'll give you an example. And actually, this guy was, I would die if he ever know this, if he ever found this out, but he was actually one of the reasons why I started doing the work that I'm doing because he treated me really horribly, actually. Like I found out that he had been, it was kind of a situationship. It wasn't even like a serious relationship. But I found out that he'd been seeing a lot of other girls and like going on vacation with them and stuff like that. And at the time, I liked him so much that I kind of like I basically just kind of put my head in the sand. I was a lot younger. Thankfully, I wouldn't do this now because I had this experience. I basically just kind of put my head in the sand and was like, oh, well, we're not really together. It's really not a big deal. It's fine. And but then at some point it got to I don't remember exactly what it was that he said. Oh, I saw a picture. There was some girl was like posting pictures of them on his Facebook, and what was weird was that she was like really in love with him, right? And you would think that me being in love with him would be the thing that would have like gotten me upset about this. But I was like, this girl seems like she's believes that she's in a relationship with him. And I asked him and I was like, hey, what's going on? Because I think this girl thinks that you're in a relationship. And he was like, no, it's not. Like, it's just kind of, you know, it's like whatever. And in my mind, I was like, wait a sec, like, is this how this guy really thinks about people? Like, and it all just kind of, came crashing down because I had this belief that, oh, like don't be too much or like don't ask for too much. And, if you just keep being, understanding, like eventually, he'll, yeah, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm saying this live on the internet, but, I think a lot of us have these kinds of thoughts that like, oh, eventually, everything will just, work out if I just keep, doing this, or if I just keep going this way, or if I just keep acting a certain way, eventually they'll like me enough. But that's not what happens, right? And I was just, after that breakup, I mean, I was just so embarrassed to even, post a picture of myself on social media because I was like, oh my God, like, what if he's gonna see it, And he made me feel really horrible about myself in that relationship. And I was, abandoning myself too by sticking around. And it just all kind of came crashing down where I was like, what the hell is wrong with me that like I'm this person who it was just like it was like layers of self-abandonment upon self-abandonment. Like I wasn't even the thing that tripped me up about this whole thing wasn't even realizing what he had done to me. It was like seeing him play this pattern out with somebody else and then realizing that like he was like 3,000 miles away and I didn't like him. I didn't really respect his opinion. I didn't want to see him again, but I was so terrified of like what he could potentially think about me that like it was still influencing my behavior, right? And I had to really sit down and ask myself, like, what am I bringing to relationships that I felt comfortable in this situation? What am I bringing to this situation? How am I thinking about things that I was comfortable in this for so long, you know? And yeah, breakups are a learning experience, and it was not nice to have to go through that. It was really embarrassing, you know? It was like it took me a long time before I was even able to say it to say it out loud. But I think that when we go through a breakup, sometimes it's mutual and sometimes we recognize that growth in each other, that we've changed and, we're happy to have held that space for each other and to move on, and that's beautiful. But sometimes it doesn't happen that way, and, that's okay. And I think sometimes it's sort of like I was talking to somebody the other day, and it's almost like sometimes you like graduate out of things, and sometimes breakups can be a reflection of that you've grown and you've changed and you've recognized things in yourself, and it's different. And sometimes you have to leave people behind, and that is totally okay, and it can be beautiful.
And sometimes a breakup saves you from living a life that you know that you're not going to be happy because there's a better life out there in the future for you as well.
Absolutely. And it's hard too because we can look and say rationally, like, I know I had to do this. I know I needed to end this relationship. But in that moment, you're only seeing what you've lost. You don't see what you have to gain. So you have to, sitting with that feeling of loss is difficult. It hurts, but the most important thing, what I always try to do with my clients is think about like, okay, let's think about those things that you needed to clear out, right? If you are going to build a new house, we don't just put a wrecking ball through it and then just start, putting plaster on the wreck that's there. No, we need to clear it out. We need to look and see, okay, how's the structure? What's going on here? Let me make a plan for what I want this new house to look like now that I have this empty space, now that I have this knowledge about what I want to build. Now that I've experienced different things, now I understand what kind of life I want to live. I know, okay, I need a bigger living room, or oh, I need a second bathroom. I need a double sink and a dishwasher. We need that information, and that's what's going to allow us to build something bigger and better and more aligned with us. But I think that it can be sometimes we don't, it's hard to let go of that loss because we don't know what we have in the future, and it might feel and like not having that sense of control can be really difficult. But the key here is to know that you're the one in control now. Like you're the one driving the ship. You know what you want, and you're free to go get it. It's all you. The world's your oyster.
You mentioned that people only look at what they've lost, and maybe that's what a lot of us have to do more of is look at what you have gained, right? Not all breakups are bad, like what you went through or what I've gone through or anything like that. Some could just be that I've outgrown this relationship and I need to take my life elsewhere. Now the person can kick, scream, and yell all they want, but if we could just be adults, and then just change your perspective. Okay, what is it that you gained? In my late teens, I had, since we're sharing, it's Honesty Sunday today. For everyone, we're all going to be honest. I had a crush on this girl in high school, and she was 2 years older. So I was like a freshman, sophomore. I was a junior, and she was like a senior in high school. So she was 2 years older, and almost every day she would ask me for money, and I would give her money, right? Because I had stardust in my eyes, and I wanted to impress her with the little change I had at the age of 15. Doing my little paper route, right? So I didn't end up dating that girl. She had a boyfriend at the time, so it just didn't work out. But that didn't stop her from being able to get $2 out of me for almost every day. This lasted like a year, Nadia.
Was she the Loch Ness monster or something? I'm just kidding.
I think so. No, she was. She was a demon. But
Yeah, in South Park, like he keeps asking for 350.
yeah, it was something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because she was taking the money to buy like pizza and stuff, right? So I'd see it and then I would see her eating it with this guy, right? So it would just break my heart at that
Oh,
time.
that's horrible, man. Especially when you're
That is
15.
horrible.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I was young and silly at that point. Fast forward, probably like 10 years later, I'm in my mid 20s, and she's probably in her late 20s now. I just visited my father and I'm at the bus stop in my car at the time, and I'm feeling kind of cool because this car had leather seats. It was beautiful. It was the first car I've ever had, and I felt like I was catnip to everybody, right? I was just this sexy beast. So I see this lady come off the bus with a double stroller. So there's two kids in this stroller. I look and I'm like, wait a minute, she looks familiar. She says my name. Hey, Train, I haven't seen you so long. I was like, oh my God, it is her.
No.
Now the roles have reversed, right? So we're talking, we're catching up. She's like, oh, we should hang out. And, I know that things didn't work out in high school, but maybe now. Now that I looked at it, I was like, I just dodged this life right here. It's showing me right in my face the life that I dodged. And I share that story because we think about what we've lost, right? Like me losing the money, me losing the opportunity to date her. But what I gained was potentially not being in a situation where her and I have multiple kids and I couldn't become the man that I am today. So I think sometimes you have to look at it from that perspective that maybe life, God, universe is telling you something when things don't work out. Would you agree with that or do you think something differently?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's like this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but like sometimes you do kind of have to have faith, not only in the situation, but also in yourself that you made the right choice. There's not always, breaking up with somebody is a big deal, especially if you've got kids together, you've got a house together, your futures are aligned. Like that's not a simple decision. But the fact is that if you've gotten to that point where you're considering ending this relationship, you're considering ending this connection, it's because something wasn't working. Things don't end when they're going perfectly and everything is aligned and everybody is happy and everything is running smoothly. But I think it's hard to not know what's the future, right? We always have to give up something to get something else. And we don't always tell people, look, you don't know what's going to happen. But what we do know is that you're the one in control, and now you know what you want. And you have this whole breadth of information about yourself and how you connect to people and what you want and what you don't want that you didn't have before. And so if we want to really make this, if we really want to rock this and we really want to turn this into something good and make this everything that you want it to be, that you're capable of, we need to really get in there and look and use this information and start building brick by brick. And I think that breakups are one of the few times in life that we really have that opportunity to have a fresh start. Back to what we were talking about earlier, like that love is only for 20 somethings, I think that one of the reasons that we look at this kind of with that sort of rosy view is that because, when you're in your 20s, you don't have kids, you don't have a house, you don't have these kinds of complications and baggage and what have you. You're sort of starting off completely with a blank slate. But when you go through a breakup, if once you've done the grieving, once you've done the work to get yourself to a place where you're really ready to move on, you're starting in the same position. You have all of those tools in front of you. You have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, in your 20s, right? The skin's tighter, the muscles are tighter. You still have hair, all of your teeth, hopefully. So I get it, right? Like we think we're at our peak in a lot of ways. And you know what? Maybe it goes back to like the Al Bundy syndrome where a lot of people do peak in high school and then it's just a long downhill slope at that point. But I think to your point, you can find love 20s, 30s, 80s. It's what are you doing to help love find you so you can find it as well. And a question that I get, and I'll share with you, Nadia, is what if someone comes to us and say, hey, what am I doing wrong? How can we help them to see that maybe they're not doing anything wrong, but maybe they actually are?
And I think a lot of times when we come across this, we have an idea of who we should be attracted to or what kind of relationship we should have. Like, all right, let's go back to talking about people in our 20s. When I was in my 20s, I wanted the guy who was the hottest and the most fun. And that was good for me. And I wasn't really thinking about all of the other things. Now in my late 30s, I'm more interested, do I trust him to clean the bathroom correctly and to, and to meet to show up when he said he's going to. Like, it's not sexy, but that's what's really, really important for me. And I think especially as we start to get older, sometimes we're thinking about like sometimes we're still looking at it through that lens, right? But let's think about all these breakups that we've been through and all of these experiences that we have. Right now, we really know what we want and what we don't want. And I think that one of the problems I see with older people is that we're just not listening to that. We think, oh, maybe I need to have somebody who does these things or does that, these other things. But it's like, wait, first of all, is this person going to choose you? Are the people that you because I've been through that where I'm seeing, these beautiful men, and they seem like they're super cool and fun. And I was like, well, they don't really like me. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not cool. But then I realized because the things that I was bringing to the table, they didn't value. It's not that they're bad people, but it's just that they are not really equipped to see the value that I have, the value that I'm bringing to the table. And so we're just not compatible. But I think sometimes when we get older, if we're not really aware of what we're bringing to the table, we have so many more things, so much more self-knowledge that we're not really putting to use. We're not really asking ourselves, wait, like what do I really need out of a partner? Like what kind of person makes me really feel alive? And what environments do I feel safe? Is how important to me is intellectual conversation. And especially if we've had a lot of relationships whereby like that person was really not able to meet our needs or we didn't really feel seen, we weren't connecting, sometimes we can end up kind of taking on this idea that, oh, like nobody does that, or like it's never going to happen for me. And that's just simply not true. And then we can end up kind of looking for people who were maybe fit an old paradigm that does not suit us. And then, so even if we meet that person, we're not in our heart really aligned with it. And then it's not going to go anywhere because there's something inside of us that's also blocking it. And it should be that way. And so I don't know if I would say that that's a matter of like doing something right or wrong, but I think that maybe the question is like how true are we being to ourselves about what's really important to us? Because most people like at any age don't do this, and I just think it's even more important to do that when you're older.
What do you then think is preventing people from identifying what they want from a relationship?
I think that we're just really, a lot of times we're thinking so much about who am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? What is a relationship supposed to look like? But the reality is that a relationship is just whatever the two people in the relationship say that it is, and however they feel good. And that's sort of what compatibility is, right? Like, that's why we're not compatible with everybody, because we all have different needs and approaches and different things. And so, like, going back to the example of that ex that I had that really, um, you know, I don't even want to say it, the guy that was seeing other girls and I was going along with it, you know? Um, like looking back at the relationship I had with him, I really just kind of was operating off this belief of, like I have a master's degree from Columbia University, I take care of myself, I'm, well-traveled, I'm multilingual. So I was like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be a catch. So therefore, like just by virtue of me being here, like that should be enough to make a relationship work, right? Like if I just keep showing up and trying to be a good girlfriend, this will work, right? But that's not how this doesn't work that way. But what I needed to do was say, okay, well, I'm going to put these good things out, but what do I really need? Like, does this person, do I feel safe with this person? Well, looking back at that, that was a resounding no. What do I really believe about what's my role in a relationship? Am I supposed to always show up no matter what? Well, yeah, I used to think so. But now I realize actually that's kind of dangerous because then I was just basically making myself compatible with people who were not good for me. And I think that especially when we're in a place where things are really uncertain or things are, when we've had the rug ripped out from under us, we kind of stick to what we know, right? And it's not really the time and place where we want to start, trying to, open our hearts up and to connect with people differently. But I'm not saying that you should do that. But I think that what's preventing most people, I believe that was your original question, is what's preventing most people is I think that we're just not asking the question. I think that's really what it comes down to.
I will 1,000,000% agree. We're not asking the right questions. And that goes for the people who are actually asking questions. Some people don't ask questions at all. I always give the example most people work or have had work experience. When we start a new company, similar to when we start a new relationship, when you start a new company, you get training. That could be 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, however long. When we start a new relationship, we do how many months of training? Zero. Hopes and dreams because all we know is our past experiences. I A girl will say that I want a guy who has six figures. He's 6 feet tall, 6 inches in the bedroom, and he is 6 feet tall, right? But if these types of men are always breaking your heart, or they're always toxic, or they're unhealthy, or they're emotionally unavailable, whatever buzzword that women like to use these days, at what point do you say, I should give the guy who's 5'9" an opportunity? Or, I should maybe get with someone that doesn't have six figures, but maybe he's 80,000. I'm not even going into the bedroom, ladies and gentlemen, because that's your own thing. I'm trying to keep it PG. But what I'm saying is that at what point do we evaluate our past and then take what has worked and discard what isn't working? Because then we hear this statement, Nadia, there aren't any good men or women out there. How would you respond to someone that has maybe a difficult dating past where they're repeating cycles, but now they're telling us that they can't find any good people out there to date?
Well, okay, let's go back to that analogy, the example you gave, the man that's making 6 feet tall and he's, makes six figures and all that. Okay, so those might be things that, we think are important. Maybe we want the status, we want to be with somebody who's attractive. However, none of these things talk about his values. Yeah, maybe makes $100,000, but maybe he's, a gambling addict and really is only keeping about 15,000 of those dollars every single year. Maybe he's a megalomaniac, maybe he's, I mean, all of these things that, a lot of times the things that we think about like are a good partner are actually not really relevant to what we need in a relationship, you know? Um, and so I think if you're saying that there is no good men left, I think the question is, why are you interacting? In what ways are you interacting with people who you say are bad men? And how are you encountering them? And why do you continue to like what is it about them that attracts them to you? And what about them makes them, not a good match for you? Because sometimes knowing what we don't want is just as valuable as knowing what we do want, and there's no shame in like we don't always, I think we never know like, okay, this is the person that's going to be right for me, or this is exactly what I need until we've experienced the opposite. And sometimes breakups are really just that they are that experience. I actually had a client once she was very educated, beautiful, well-traveled, and she dated a guy who was he had some addiction issues. He was a high-powered lawyer, made a ton of money, but he had some serious anger issues, and he took care of her, and he was the provider, and he kind of fit the bill of a lot of the things that she wanted out of a partner, right? Like he was 6 feet tall and he made the six figures. I don't know if he was 6 inches. We didn't talk about that. But he had all of these other things that were objectively, what would make him a catch. And so because of that, she stayed, even though she was miserable. And so in the work that we did, we said, okay, well, what was it about him that you actually really wanted? She was very smart. She was financially stable. So she wanted to be with a man who was financially stable. And that is totally appropriate, right? That's a values alignment. But a lot of times we're looking at people who are not aligned with our lifestyle, who are not aligned with our values, because there's things that we might think are valuable, but they're not necessarily our values, if that makes sense.
Do you then think that people will take on superficial things and not worry about what's underneath the surface?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Of course, this is the tw life of 2026 life we're living in, right? I mean, this is the TikTok world of today, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's been interesting for me, being on the apps and seeing how this kind of plays out where I see a lot of people who their profiles are absolutely immaculate and they really want to exchange social media. Like I have some men who want to exchange social media, like without really even getting to know each other, just to be like, see how great I am. And it's, but when it comes to actually, maybe my perspective is different because of the work that I do, but there's a lot of, I think there's kind of like, as a reflection of sort of the idea of like if we are doing things a certain way and if we look a certain way and all of these things kind of check the boxes and everything else should be should kind of fall into place. And I understand that because those are the things that we can see, right? They're on the surface. If somebody is presenting as a real mess, that's not going to make anybody want to date them, right? But that's just the first part. That's the first piece of the puzzle. That's not the whole story.
I think that is so tough because you have people who will struggle trying to understand why they want certain things. How can they find better relationships?
I don't think you always need to understand why you like something. You can just understand that you do and explore that. And then the deeper understanding will come later. I think that sometimes there's nothing wrong with wanting to understand. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think introspection, obviously, as a therapist, I think this is incredibly helpful and incredibly important. But if you don't know everything right away, that's okay. Just sometimes even saying, like, okay, this worked and then this did not work. And then just saying, okay, well, what's left? Let me just give it a try and see, and you'll just keep learning and you'll just keep exploring. And I think that's really, and I think that, going back to the idea of dating, I think especially after a breakup, I think that can also be a really helpful way to think about dating, not for like, I need to find a relationship right now, not that I need to make things appear a certain way. Just let me just be curious and get to know this person and see what happens and then get to know each other. Because ultimately, if you're going to be in a relationship with them, that's what you got to do anyway.
Oh yeah, like people need to truly understand that every relationship, if you take risks, you may want love that's unconditional, but a lot of relationships are conditioned. Don't cheat on me. Don't beat me. Don't abuse me in some way. I look back at this one lady, she shared her experience and she was like, Terrain, I always want a guy that has big hands. I was like, big hands? Like, what the hell is big hands? She's like, that's just my thing. I was okay. Write down 5 things that you want. 3 are behavioral, 2 are physical. So she lists them big hands, and she said something else. And then behaviors, personalities where she struggled. She couldn't come up with anything. So I gave her the examples. Okay, do you want him to love your child because she was a single parent and she had a child from a previous relationship? She's like, yeah, write that down. Are you religious? She's like, yeah, I go to church. I was okay. You want someone that has understanding of that? Write that down. What I found in her experience, and this is anecdotal, but I share it with a lot of people because I've seen it and you mentioned the apps, is that physically we know what we want. That joke, right? 6 feet, whatever, whatever. Emotionally and personality, I think that's where a lot of people struggle because then it's probably going to be a reflection on themselves saying that this is what I bring to the table. I need someone to understand these things. I need someone to meet me where I am. Do you see there being gaps when it comes to people understanding, hey, a relationship is more than the physical? What does a person bring to create a healthy relationship?
Yeah, that's really tough because that's where vulnerability comes in. And I think that, especially when you're meeting somebody on an app, like, I don't want to be vulnerable with somebody I don't know, and you shouldn't be, but I think we need to, we don't have to, go all in and put our heart in our sleeve right from the very beginning. But, if if that's when, we talk about non-negotiables in dating, I think a lot of times we think about, he has big hands, he has this and he has that. But we're not really talking about, the values alignment or our goals alignment and the things that we actually want to bring together. Because that's something that, like if I go out with a guy and he was really hot and but then it turned out that we weren't compatible, like, okay, it's not really a big deal. But if this was somebody that I really shared something with, or somebody who I was like, wow, like this person seems, I told him about my daughter and he was really excited to meet her, and then that didn't work out, well, that feels like a bigger loss, you know? So that is something that I think is it's harder, but I think the things that are worth it are harder. Um, and also it's difficult to know when you're out there, especially if you're new to dating, to know like who's going to be real and who's genuine when you're putting yourself out there. And who really, some people will say like, I really want this, or I really, how many people do we know have a story about they started dating somebody who said, oh, I'm not really interested in a relationship, and then started dating somebody else seriously 6 months later.
But I always think in general, that's a reflection on the person that doesn't end up with the relationship. And I'll give you an example why. If I put myself out there and I want to date Maria from the neighborhood, right? And we're going on first day, second day, third date, and after a while, I asked her, I was like, okay, do you want to be exclusive? And she says no. And then months later, when I see her again, she's in a relationship with someone else and they look like they're exclusive. That's a reflection on me because the way I would look at it is that she didn't want a relationship with me at that point in time. And that could be a number of reasons. Maybe there's certain things that I did, maybe there's certain things I didn't do. Whereas she found her non negotiables in someone else. She was more goal aligned with that. But to hear people maybe say it, they'll say that, well, it's Maria's fault. I'm the catch. I'm the prize. I'm the table. The problem is when you start thinking that way and you start using those terms, you don't put yourself in a perspective of self-reflection. Where can I grow to get the type of relationship I want? If you've gone 10, 15, 20 years unable to get the relationship you want, is it really everybody else? Or could it be you? Your thoughts?
Well, if everywhere you go smells like shit, then check your shoe. Um, no, but really, if we say like, oh, it's Maria's fault, well, it's Maria is just dating the person that she feels connected to. And if you found out something about Maria that really was not aligned with you, then you would also not continue dating Maria, right? Um, and it's really just as simple as that. And I think that like sometimes I think that sometimes we have this feeling, especially if we've gone through a hard breakup where we were blindsided and we're almost like looking for a way to understand like what happened, like how could I prevent this from happening again? And so we feel like we need to be so good that nobody would ever leave us, that they would be such a fool to leave us, right? But that's just not how it works. That's not how compatibility works. And also, there's a lot of times where you might be dating somebody and you could be amazing for them. And you could be, how many times do you see somebody who's dating somebody who's, out of their league, right? And that relationship doesn't work out because the person who was uh in the league, like it couldn't keep up, or they weren't able to really support their partner and give them what they needed. It's not about like, oh, it's your fault. It's a compatibility issue. Like, for example, I really do not care for truffles. I really just cannot do truffles, even though they are super expensive and there's a bazillion-dollar industry dedicated to truffles, and there's specialized dogs who just go and find truffles, and there's all this stuff. But I don't like truffles, and that's not a reflection on truffles. Like, they're just not for me. So, you know what? Maybe you're a truffle, or maybe, like yuzu sauce doesn't go with everything. Maybe you're a yuzu, and that's okay. People don't have to like yuzu. But if you're trying to mix vanilla ice cream with truffles or something, like that's not going to be a good combination? So it's not about, and I think that sometimes that can be also a way to kind of, I don't want to say make ourselves feel better. It can be a way to kind of lessen the blow, but it's not that. It's just you were just not compatible, and that's okay. The most important thing is you need to be with people who are going to choose you, people that you are compatible with. Because if somebody is, because a lot of times, like let's say in the example that you just gave, this person Maria, let's say maybe you were only dating her for a couple of months. There is a whole universe inside Maria that you don't know about that, and so you don't know her well enough to say, yeah, we're actually compatible, or or I would be good for her. Well, how do you know that? You don't really know what she wants or where she's going, and if we're thinking in that way, then, your worth becomes aligned to somebody else picking you or what somebody else thinks about you instead of just being who you are, you know? Which maybe you're a vanilla ice cream cone with sprinkles, maybe you're yuzu sauce, maybe you're a truffle, maybe you're not everything is going to blend with everything else, but that doesn't make them less amazing or valuable.
And to your earlier point about the square peg in the round hole, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. And some people will force the issue. And I think the difficulty with that is if you're forcing something to work and it doesn't work out and you get disappointed, many people can feel jaded, right? As you mentioned, I gave 1,000% in this relationship. Why doesn't this person want me? Why didn't it work? I have this, and this. But yet, here I am, single again, feeling lonely again, and I just don't know where to go. Nadia, when you hear some people being unsuccessful and they become so jaded, so full of disappointment, where now it's impacting them on unhealthy levels, how do we help them to soothe and to rebound?
You don't need to collect all the accomplishments and all of the good things to be valuable. You can, you don't need to do that. You are as you are. And the right person, this is going to sound so cliche, but the right person, first of all, like before anything else, if this person does not see you that way, if they are not crazy about you, if they're not interested in you, they are not the one for you. And I think just looking at it through that lens can just save so much heartache because what ends up happening is if you're not looking at it that way, you can almost feel like you're trying to prove yourself or you have to work for love. And what ends up happening is that then you end up putting in so much and that the sunk cost is so great, but then you feel like you've lost so much because you've taken everything that you've had and you've just put it out into somebody else who doesn't really value it. Let's say you go into you, let's say somebody was gifted a Porsche and this person is a mess. They leave the Porsche out on the front yard. They don't put wheels on it. The thing gets rusted. It's still a Porsche, but if you didn't know it, but if you're, that doesn't mean that Porsche is now a bad brand or a Porsche is invaluable just because this other person didn't know how to take care of it. A person who owns a Porsche needs to be the person who understands how to take care of it, who understands why this is a valuable car, who understands the mechanics of, I'm getting off the rails here. I don't know enough about cars to like flesh out this analogy, but my point is that, the real tragedy in that is that like, you're working so hard. I see this actually happening a lot for high performers because um it's like you do so much and you know how much you're capable of and like you can see and all of the things that you're capable of and all of the things that you have to value to offer somebody and why it's so valuable. But then if you're constantly trying to show up for people who are not going to do the same for you, well, eventually the message is going to be, oh, you're not valuable. There's a term that I used to call it the mirror self. Some people call it the looking glass self. It's basically that we learn about ourselves through the way that people perceive and respond to us, right? So if every time you go into a room, people smile and they look happy, you feel good about yourself, you feel safe, you feel seen. But even if you had great self-esteem and you were feeling great, if every time you walked into a room, people scowled and they tensed up and they looked away, you're going to start to feel uncomfortable with yourself, especially if you're in a situation where you don't really have your bearings or you don't really know what's going on, right? And so if you are continually putting yourself out there for people who do not deserve it, who don't see you, people who are not compatible, people who would not choose you, then eventually you're going to start to believe that about yourself. And the more you start to believe that about yourself, then you're going to start to inject that into your dating life. You're going to start to be with people who also reflect that and then it can be a very lonely place because it can also bring resentment into relationships because you're like, hey, wait a sec, like I know I have all of these things and they're not seeing it, they're not respecting it, they're not valuing it. If I gifted somebody a Porsche and then I went to their house and I found it, on cinder blocks in the front yard, I'd be pretty upset, right? Because I just spent, I don't know how much Porsches cost, a whole lot of money, but if I went out there and I found them doing that, I'd be like, what the hell? Like, this is my life, this is my work, I put everything into this, and you just, it's a real disrespect, you know? And we're essentially doing the same thing. Like, you're not a, don't be the Porsche on the cinder blocks, be with people who really see and value you. But that's also difficult because that requires vulnerability. And so sometimes it can be really difficult to kind of get out of that space where I might feel safe almost in some ways, to be with people who don't fully see you. But at the same time, it's also a deeply unsatisfying place to be. And sometimes that feeling that we're having is really, like you said in the beginning of the episode, body knows this isn't working for us.
And our accomplishments, especially as we get older, becomes a safe space for people. I have this high-end job. I have this big house. I have the Ferrari, and it's not on cinder blocks because I drive it and I show it off all the time, right? And I think one big concern that I've noticed, especially over the last number of years, is many people, especially those who are single for quite some time and maybe don't have the best peer group around them, is they've built a dating life where they would date the type of person that they are, but the person that they want wouldn't date them. So I'll give you an example. Some people, to your high performing example, will say that I have the house, the car, and I make six figures and I work 60 hours a week. Another person may say that, well, the person I'm looking for, I don't want them to work that often. And I don't really care about a house because I have my own house and I can drive my own car. I want someone that is going to be able to do the vacations with me. I want someone who's going to be able to do the long walks with me. I want someone that's going to go to the gym. So that high performer who's working 60, 70, 80 hours, you don't have these times to do things. So you may think that they're a nice man or a woman and you want to be with them, but you're not the type of person that they want because it comes down to, are do you know what's valuable to the person that you want to be with? Instead of looking at it as, well, I've accomplished this, so I know that I would date me. Perfect. That's what you've been doing because you're single. You are dating yourself. You take yourself to dinners, you take yourself to lunches, you take yourself to vacations. Do you see people having a unhealthy view of themselves when it comes to dating to the point where they're not trying to attract the type of person that they're not trying to create the kind of value that the person that they want will see. They're more stuck on creating the type of value that they want for themselves and expecting others to value it the same way.
Yeah, and I think they kind of happen at the same time. I mean, I think that there's, I want to, like, the things that are important to me. If the person, my person, if they don't understand why that's important, then that's going to be a problem, right? But at the same time, sorry, I think I forgot one of the examples that you said, but why do, like, they're not making themselves compatible with the kind of person that they want. But I think that sometimes the person that we want is not necessarily aligned with what we actually need. So, like, for example, I might say, well, I want a guy that makes a lot of money, but the people that I know who make a lot of money also don't really share my interest. Or, maybe they have a lot of money because they are working 60 hours a week and I really value quality time. And so when I try to get close to them, I feel like I'm not being seen and it's not really, and I don't feel comfortable with him and I can't open up. And then it feels like I'm just constantly hitting walls. And if you're coming to that, I think it's important to ask, why do I want this thing? Why do I want this person to make a lot of money? Is it because I really value financial stability? Is it because I really want kids and I want to know they're going to be a good provider? Do I want, is because to me that's a person who's responsible? Because also, by the way, you can make a lot of, I know a lot of people who make a lot of money and they don't actually have that much money because they don't manage it well. But a person who doesn't make a lot of money can actually be more wealthy because they're financially responsible and they know how to manage it. And so really think about, why do you want this? Because just by saying I want this because I do, that's, when it comes to relationships, this is such a big part of your life. Like, that's never the full story. Why do you want this? What's your value in this? Why is this important? You know, for me, I try to be financially stable because I don't want to struggle in life and I don't want to, this is really important to me. So it's not necessarily that I want somebody who has a lot of money. I want somebody who's responsible. And if he has money, if he has a lot of money, then that's good, but that's not the most important thing.
Yeah, I would say that it's like the byproduct. I want someone that's financially stable, and you can be financially stable at different levels. You can be financially stable at 60,000, 80,000,
Yeah.
200,000, right? Now, if I'm trying to reverse engineer it and say that I want a woman that makes 200,000, but she's living out of a shoebox, my question is, okay, you make all this money, what's happening? Are you a gambler in your earlier example? Do you have an addiction? Um, what is going on? And maybe there's some anxiety there because for me, what I look at in a partner is I look for someone that is able to take care of themselves as well as someone that is stable financially, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, right? So we can build together. So these are things that I would pursue in a person. And the reason why I want those things is because I want to make sure that we can build and be safe together in these four areas because they're key to me. I wouldn't go on there and say that, okay, money, 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 big boobs, big butts, whatever. Okay, why do I want those things? It all points to the bedroom. I can't say that, you know what, I think is going to create a healthy relationship unless there's another dynamic there. And I always wonder then when people are dating or trying to rebuild after a breakup, one of the questions that I hear is, where do I find a good relationship? We
Well,
know how to make ourselves better. We know how to maybe improve ourselves, but then there's that struggle. So, Nadia, where do we find good relationships?
well, the secret is that you don't find good relationships. You show up and you build good relationships together.
I didn't pay her for that answer, everybody. That was 100% genuine because that's what it takes. Do you think people confuse the two between finding and building?
Yeah, totally. Because I think that there's, if we're looking at it like I want somebody who's, six figures, 6 feet tall, 6 inches, what have you, that might be like, okay, like this fits into the mold. But then it's like, well, then this looks like it should be a relationship, but it's not acting, it's not acting like that. That's just not how it works. I think a lot of times, what I've seen in all my years of doing this, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, like, relationships are a lot of it's standing on lines together and asking what you want for dinner and, cleaning the bathroom and just doing normal stuff like this. It's not always going to be those moments of excitement. It's about how you show up for each other, how you share your goals, how you grow together, how you see each other, how you support each other. And if that's not there, and I always say, like, if I can't have fun with him while standing on a line, I don't think it's going to work out. Because I need to enjoy his presence. I need to enjoy being with him. I need to trust that I'm not obsessed with cleaning the bathroom. I need to know that he's going to be clean the bathroom the way that, I would like because I really like having a clean house and that's important to me. I need to know that he really understands me and what's important to me, and I need to be able to give the same back to him. But we do that because we get to know each other. We get to understand each other and to take into account what the other person needs. And if we don't do that, and also if we don't know what we need and we can't add then we can't ask for it, it's never going to come. So it always comes down to really being clear on what you need in the relationship and continuing to, really be real with yourself. It's okay to have needs, and I think a lot of times especially when we've gotten out of a tough relationship, sometimes it's easier to say like, oh, if I had just had this, or if I didn't need this, or if I, like in this case where I went through that really horrible breakup, it was like, well, if I could just somehow find a way to like be okay with him dating all these other women, this relationship would work. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe it would have, but it wouldn't have worked for me. And, my body, mind, and soul kind of eventually stepped in and was like, all right, like, we need to stop this. But yeah, they're not, you don't find the relationship. You make connections and then you work to build it.
And it's all about making the unsexy things sexy, such as cleaning the bathroom, doing the dishes, standing in line and having fun, because the physically sexy things don't last forever. And I think sometimes we confuse the two, to your point. We need to build it, and we're building it From the tires to the bolts to everything to continue the car analogy, or for those who own houses, because we all need a place to live, you're building from the foundation up. And I think some people think that, well, I already want the person already made. So it has to be show up to the door, 5 bedroom mansion, and I'm moving in. Well, maybe they're not going to open the door for you and let you in, right? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that there's it's one thing to say, hey, I really, these are my requirements. Like, I need somebody who is going to be financially stable. I want somebody who, who is trustworthy. Like, I don't want to be with somebody who I have to, if I have to teach him how to do these things, like, that's really, he's not meeting me where I am. And so I need somebody who's, sort of ready-made in this way. So that way I know we can connect with each other and we're at the place where we can do this together. But that's not the same as having the relationship ready made. Just the foundation is stable enough to build off of.
Do you think sometimes our preferences can be our prison when it comes to dating?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, I mean, we all have, and I think this is especially true when we're younger. I think that this kind of fades away a bit as we get older and we're more connected to like what we really need. But yeah, I mean, I've dated my fair share of fuck boys, and there was just something about them in my 20s that I just really couldn't seem to get away from, and it was never satisfying and it never worked out and I just kept doing it. And, eventually, once I got older and I started understanding myself and understanding my patterns and understanding why I was attracted to these things and what I really wanted. And, after going through this cycle and going through many embarrassing breakups that shouldn't have happened at all, or the relationship shouldn't have started at all, to be frank, I really started to understand like, okay, this is maybe I like a man who is fun, somebody who I really, you know, feel free and I can really enjoy my time with. But I can get that with somebody who can match me on a spiritual and emotional level and, you know, not be a fuckboy.
Yeah, let's leave the Tyrones to those people down the street, and we don't want those city boys, those F boys, or anything like that. And to the men out there, please, please, let me share this before we have to let Nadia go. Is substance, right? I don't mean substance as a drug. I mean substance in the person. Like dig a little bit deeper and get to know the person. To Nadia's point, you're gonna build it, because this will take me to my final question for you, Nadia. Before I let you go, I want to give you 3 wishes, and I want you to wish for 3 things when it comes to this question. What are 3 things you wish people knew about identifying their cycles when it comes to dating, and why?
Three things I wish they knew about identifying their cycles and why. It's a it's quite a sophisticated question. I got to think about this for a moment. What are three
I do
things
try, my friend. I do try.
No, no, this is great. What are three things I wish I knew about identifying their cycles and why? So one, I would want them to know that you don't need to understand why you have a cycle. Like it's so you can do so much without having to know why. Just know that it's there and recognize it because if you know that you're about to go down a bad path, you can course correct. But if we wait and wait and wait to try to know every single thing that we can about it, we can end up intellectualizing ourselves out of actually taking real action and getting stuck in a situation we don't want to be in. So let's see, don't need to know. The second one I would say is that don't be afraid of it. I think, look, I think that there's sometimes this idea that like I think we talked about this best last time. Like if you are smart, you have your shit together, like you should just be good at relationships. And like that is totally not true. They are a totally different skill set and they are so personal and they are a culmination of basically everything that we are, right? Like we that's the crux of how we relate to other people. So whatever cycle it is that you recognize that you have, like just identify it, take it as information, and don't judge yourself about it. Just just accept it because this is a beautiful part of you, and we learn these cycles and we learn the patterns and these belief systems from our upbringing, from the people around us. And some of them are better than others, and that is not a reflection on you. But if we say like, oh, like, when I how I got to the point of being able to admit on the internet on a live stream that I was trying to pursue this guy who was dating other girls, I realized that this was something like I really needed to work on in myself. And it was super embarrassing. But by just saying, hey, yeah, like this is the thing I do, and like I need to, like, really just getting real with myself was what allowed me to be able to work past that. And I think that, like, people can also be really hard on each other, like, oh my God, I can't, why this person going out with this person, or I can't believe that he's dating this girl, and all this kind of stuff. And it can be really embarrassing. But just let them hate. Don't, and definitely don't do that to yourself. This is a coming to those realizations, and sometimes they come from breakups that are really painful, but it's a really beautiful thing. And so don't deny yourself that, um, even though it might really suck to go through that in the moment. And the third thing is they can also always be changed. A cycle is just a cycle. It doesn't have to be